Hello, welcome everybody. This is my first installment of Laura's informational YouTube videos with a focus on queer, LGBTQ, and trans issues. Today, I would like to focus on transgender issues and how we can all be a better ally. I feel like, as far as covering transgender issues, for me, I identify as a cis female, and queer, asexual, pansexual, and my partner's transgender. So this is why this issue is really important to me, and I think that it's something that I feel comfortable talking about, which leads right into my first point. Number one, it's really important as allies that we let people tell their own stories. An example of this would be like somebody telling their story through their own lens. Like, you think of all the literature, media, and all of these things that you could almost tell that it was told by someone else that may not have lived those experiences themselves. And as allies, and anybody in the social justice movement, as we're lifting up each other's voices and looking into the most marginalized communities, we need to make sure that we are not telling those people's stories through our lens and our life experience. These stories are better told from the source. Alright, so moving on from that, number two, the other thing I would like to talk about is how diverse the transgender umbrella is. The transgender is a umbrella identity, and there are so many gender diverse identities that fall underneath this umbrella. And even beyond just the gender identities themselves, transgender people themselves are really diverse. They're not just some homogenized group like, oh, the transgender people over there. Not the case. I know transgender office workers, I know musicians, I know artists, I know professors. It doesn't really matter. People can be any career, any hobby, any interest, any clothing. It really doesn't matter. Transgender people are just as diverse as any other community. Which leads me into also number three, cultural and intersectional identities. Something that I've learned as a student at OSU and as a student of queer studies is that you think about cultural queer identities. For example, Two-Spirit indigenous identities. Before I studied this, I thought that just meant like specifically transgender indigenous people, which is not the case. It is another whole umbrella of identities, of queer identities, that just focuses more on the indigenous populations. That said, that does not mean that all indigenous people are under the Two-Spirit umbrella either. You should never assume. That's another part of being a good ally. And there can be other intersections, which kind of goes along with the diversity of transgender people as a whole. Like, there could be intersections of race, class, disability, neurodivergence, for example. That's one of mine. Alright. Anyways, moving on. Number four. Please don't ask transgender people a bunch of intrusive questions. I don't know why people do this. Like, cis heteronormative people don't just go up and start, I don't know, asking people about surgeries and your genitalia. But for some reason, people just feel that they can do that with transgender people. Stop it. Don't do that. Nobody wants to answer those questions. Heck, some people don't even like to ask what they do. Find some common ground. We're all just people here, Which leads into a major point, number five. We should all be doing our own research. What I mean by that is we should all be looking into these terms, what it means to be transgender, what it means to be LGBTQ, what are, the biggest issues in the news. Just, it's our job to understand that. It is not a queer person's job to inform us and answer all of our curiosity. I'm telling you, they're exhausted. We're all exhausted. It's not something that you put onto people. This was a lesson that, honestly, that I learned a lot of through the BLM and Black Lives Movement. Whereas, people were saying over and over, like, we're exhausted. It's on the community to do their own research and to, figure out what things mean themselves. Point number 6. This one is one I think that gets passed over quite a bit, is using inclusive language. Here's what I mean. So, like, let's say we're about to give a speech. Traditionally, you would think, oh, ladies and gentlemen. Well, what about non-binary folks? There's an easier way to go about this. You can say, welcome distinguished guests. I actually like that. Some other ones we could, you all, students, folks, for a more down-to-earth, less formal introduction. Any of these things work in place of those, any of those gender normative identity languages. And this kind of goes along with doing your own research too. Like, if you're going to give a speech or do something like that, just look it up. See what other words you could use. It's not any different than using a thesaurus for writing. Alright, now we're down to the nitty-gritty. Here towards the end of the list is stuff that we can really do. One of these things, like directly, is to be able to speak up. Don't just stand around and let your friends make crappy jokes, or any of those homophobic, transphobic, turf nonsense. No, stand up for your friends. You think it's uncomfortable for you to stand up? Think of how it feels to be somebody in a group like that. You need to be the one. It's not on them either. If you're a good ally, you'll stick up for your friends and your family, or heck, even a stranger. Another one that I think is really important is look into who you're voting for. It is really, really important. I know a lot of people are like, oh, I just won't vote, whatever. Well, for many of us, our lives are on the line. Like, literally, it's life and death. We're talking about suicide rates. We're talking about our, just medical rights, the right to live, the right to employment. So it is super important. And I'm not talking about just on a national level. Make sure you're looking at your local elections as well. Another one that we can do on a local level is to, support transgender businesses, artists, creators. There's some wonderful creators out there. One of the, there's a YouTube series called Brothers that was written by transgender men about transgender male issues. We learned this in one of my classes. You should check it out. It's great. But then that's just one of a million out there. So make sure you're supporting those people. And the very last point I'd like to make, and it's a pretty easy one, a really easy thing that everybody can do, is to use pronouns. And what I mean by that is, like, when you're, your email signatures, or, like, if you're writing a letter or things like that, like, I always sign my name, Laura Smith, she, her. I think that'll take away from the assumptions, and it just normalizes it. We shouldn't assume just because of an outside expression what somebody's gender identity is. That's something that's really personal. Well, I think I have talked enough for today. I hope you all have a great day, and don't forget, be gay, do crime. Check you later.